Thank you so much, Joe. You know, I come back because Joe emails me and I'm not able to turn him down. But it's always a pleasure. I think, you know, among my most favorite, I love World Affairs Councils. I love people across America who are interested in international affairs, global affairs. I know so many of you have been foreign service officers or served or you want your kids to. And, you know, I've gone to Bartlesville, Oklahoma, Dubuque, Iowa. I go everywhere, you know, if they'll, you know, give me a cup of coffee. Or something like this, and I would tell you, it's Deb, right? Mm-hmm. So Deb, I would tell you, I would go back to 7th grade just to listen to you. You know, she's a high school teacher. You're really good at that. And it's Deb and Joe? And did I have that right? Or Mary and Dave Owens. Though they heard me in Denver, and I can't believe you came back for more. This was just a few months ago. And I'll just put this on the phone. I've been told, you know, you're videotaping this, and you know, the more provocative I am, the more views you'll get, the better it is for everybody, right? So, but that night, there's a great director there named John Krieger, and he called me up after and he said, "Steve, something happened, never happened." He says, "A couple of my board members and big important players, you know, everybody liked you." He says, he started with, everybody liked you, but he says, some of them just said, "I couldn't believe you brought somebody that liberal." And then another couple of them said, "I couldn't believe you brought a Trumpy." And so same night, same event, you were there, you judged, right? So I was with you know, Brett Baer, you know, 2 nights ago from Fox, and he was at something, a great tribute to a wonderful American named Arnold de Borgraaf. If any of you know Arnold, and he was a very big newspaper man, and years ago we had a dinner every year in his honor, and Brett was talking about, hey, we report, you decide. So you can decide. Let's talk about it. I mean, I look at every audience, and if I look at the average audience right now, I look at it as 49.88% Trump and 48.24% Harris right now as things stand. So I know we have a split group, and I will probably remark on some things that, you know, may be uncomfortable or different than you see it. And I love conversations, and I want to get my part of this done so I can actually respond to your questions and interests. Maybe you're not interested in foreign policy at all. And I've done I've had, you know, like Joe said, the privilege, I'm part journalist, part political boss in Washington, part fixer, you know, a little bit of everything. But I've had some extraordinary interviews this past year, and I've done, you know, like people like Paul Kagame of Rwanda, and I convinced President Kagame to give me the story. I broke the story globally of Paul Rusesabagina being released. If you ever saw Hotel Rwanda, that was the person who'd been jailed. There is not a lot of love lost between Paul Rusesabagina and Paul Kagame. We can go into that. But he was jailed, and he was in Rwanda. And it was a thorn in the side, and I interviewed Paul Kagame now about 6 times, and I could tell there was a thaw, and I was on stage and I said, President Kagame, if you release him, are you going to give me the story first? And he committed to do so, and he did, and this is one of the great, you know, opportunities. So I'm happy to talk about other things than America's narcissistic moment about itself and its elections. But we can get into this. But let me just talk about, you know, some things that I think are very apparent to me. And again, so many of you could be up here giving this talk yourselves. I mean, given the service, many I know you have lived through and gone. And, you know, just to give you a little preamble, I grew up as an Air Force brat. I lived all over the world on military bases with my dad, whom I adored. He died my first day of college when I went to UCLA. And it kind of blew up my family for a long time. But I wasn't from America. I was really from Japan. In fact, I had a very interesting moment. I ended up working in an odd way because I was not a Republican. I've always been an independent, but I wasn't a Republican nor a Nixon groupie. But I ended up working for President Nixon his last 2 years of his life. That's another story. And also, Donald Trump came and grabbed me in 2015 at the White House Correspondents' Dinner about something I had said on TV that Trump had seen that I'd also told Nixon, is that I know nothing about American sports. Nothing. I know a lot about sumo and Yokozuna. And when Trump came and grabbed me, he says, "Sumo, what are you talking about?" He had seen me on Morning Joe. Speaking of Morning Joe, some of you may have seen that little drama, you know, about Joe and Scarborough and Mika going down to Mar-a-Lago to beg forgiveness or something along those lines, reset the relationship. Well, we can get into that. But I wanted to just simply say that I've worked theoretically on both sides of the aisle. I try to be keep my aperture open. And I'm trying very hard to keep my aperture open on what Donald Trump means, what his franchise of people mean and will do. And I've tried to already, way in anticipation of Trump coming in, ask myself, how am I going to report on and engage someone who said some pretty horrible, awful things, but how are we going to measure that person's actions? How are we going to report on them? And do I close down my expectations of what they're doing? So I decided a long time ago, I'm going to wait and see what they do, kick the tires as they go along, but I don't need to go down and tell Donald Trump that in Mar-a-Lago. That was a big mistake of these folks. And I sort of think that right now, particularly so many of you are interested in foreign policy, that we're in a clear, to go to 7th grade and high school books, this is going to be a clear, we just clearly ended the chapter of globalization, and we've entered a chapter for right now of pugnacious nationalism, not only in America, but around the world. You're seeing nations trying to wrestle with the constructs and relationship they have. You see it in Europe in some places, but the populist trend is not everywhere, but it's a lot of places. Populism, can be jingoistic, it can be deeply nationalistic, it can be sometimes racist, it can be driven by a lot of different things. But what it is a very big rejection of the other on the outside. And that must be hard for people like yourselves who think America has a principled place in the world, is doing great things, and being engaged in the world really matters as part of our DNA, and it is. But America is schizophrenic. There are a lot of different personalities struggling to get out. And right now, a different personality has popped out, and that's going to be the pugnacious nationalist personality of America that is now dominant, clearly dominant. And those people who want to, hang out at the UN and go to World Affairs Council's dinners, they're going to be slightly in the minority, but they're not out of the race. But this is a time, I used to tell people that Bill Clinton-style globalization, where you had Tom Friedman writing about, a flatter world and everybody wanted to be like us, and the golden straitjacket, if any of you read Tom Friedman over those many years ago, 20, 30 years ago, that was kind of a world that was trying to be a very connected world with higher and higher trust. So you could move people and ideas and institutions more. I was just talking to someone in the Rotary Club, that more frictionlessly across borders. There was a sense that there was this homogenization and connectivity that was going on around the world. Now we're all connected around the world, but now we have walls. We have nations separating themselves. We have a high fear connectivity, a high fear kind of globalization, which is turning into this nationalistic moment. And I think Donald Trump, and we'll get into this, I'm going to watch my time because I want to get all this, but I think Donald Trump has created some of it, but he's mainly a manifestation of a lot of frustration inside America. And we can get into that. I'm sure many of you are part of that, and I don't blame him for it. I am related to many, many people who believe strongly in Donald Trump's style of leadership and what he represents. And I know, and this is why when I was an MSNBC contributor, I felt Donald Trump coming, and I was one of two people, Michael Steele was the other, who said we felt it was likely that Trump was going to win. Did not really make me a very popular person among the MSNBC hosts at that time, but I was right. And even though it was a close race. But in that process, when you look at it, you ask, how did we get here? How did we get to this place where a rich billionaire, real estate tycoon in New York could become the poster child for angry, frustrated Americans, particularly in the American South? And I'll tell you what I think happened. And I've written about this quite a bit. I think a lot of Americans began to feel as if, particularly Americans who fought in battles, who joined the military, who had family lore that their relatives were in battle since the Revolution, the Civil War, the Vietnam War, the Korean War, World War II, World War I, as in my family. My brother joined the military. He was one of these people who joined and then served, and that somehow they worked, and it was kind of part of the move forward, move up the ladder in America was part of this service. But somehow at the end of that process, at the end of the Cold War, China won. Somehow that quid pro quo that used to be there, that if you fought, that America playing a guarantor in the world, being a great security buffer for the rest of the world, used to feel like it benefited the American middle class. And I think that broke when offshoring hit, when you had the worst sides of the hollowing out of a lot of industry in the United States, and you compounded that with things like the 2008, 2009 financial crisis. You had a lot of people left behind. And I remind people that 08, 09 financial crisis, which was not too long ago, was very formative for many of the voters that have just come in. It's remarkable how many young voters and Gen Z voters, we were just talking about this, supported Trump. And it's because I think they feel as if America's global engagement doesn't pay off for them. In fact, they have to pay too much for it. So when Donald Trump in 2016 was saying, hey, we're engaged in the world and everybody's ripping us off, that played really well. Now, among the strategic class, among people who had been in Washington and Boston and New York and Philadelphia, they couldn't believe anybody would listen to that. And I think, but you have to understand, you got to put yourself in the shoes of other people who said somehow we ended up losers in this, even though our families served this nation, in so many different ways. And I think, Hillary's comments along the way about deplorables, et cetera, threw a little spice into that. But I think fundamentally, I tell people, it doesn't matter if it's Russia or whoever it is, the sense that people can have of being humiliated and demeaned and left behind is the biggest driver in politics, and it's the biggest driver in foreign policy. It's the biggest driver of wars. And if you have a lot of people, whether they're right or not, who feel demeaned, left behind, not part of the success track, and somehow different, and you give them the internet, and you figure out ways that they can organize, that pugnacious international rejectionist crowd has been with us for a long time. I knew Pat Buchanan really well. I mean, he was also part of the Nixon world that I was in. So we've always seen that part. That 10% has grown to 20, 25% through organization, seduction, and frustration that people have felt. And I think that other 25% has become more compelling with various people who may have had decisions one way or another on whether they thought America was on the right track or the wrong track. But in this place we're at, you've got today, and you kind of look at it objectively, and again, I'm going to be honest with you folks, I think Barack Obama and Joe Biden have missed an incredible opportunity to re-inspire the world, re-inspire Americans about America's place in the world, rewire institutions so they work. When you look at most of our global institutions, they don't match the way power is distributed. Where's Brazil? Where's India? Where are these large population centers in the world? How are we kind of weaving in other major stakeholders into the permanent five in the Security Council, or changing the way in which we think about it? America has looked very selfishly protective of certain ways things were organized 70 years ago with not enough reform. And I think that mismatch between the way power and realities are done today and how institutions are there gave Donald Trump another huge opportunity to come in and say, this is all garbage, and the UN is worthless and doesn't achieve anything, doesn't do anything. Look at how it's organized. And I think that a lot of these gaps, I looked at Barack Obama. In fact, I helped run a think tank called the New America Foundation, where we were sort of promoting, and I knew all of his people, and I said, look, you've got an opportunity to come in as the secretariat for a new order of a new global social contract to change and revise these institutions so they fit better, they work better, and they respect the aspirations of some of these other countries. And that by showing respect to their role, yeah, you're going to have to give up a little bit of power, but in the end, as Stalin knew, being the secretary can be a good thing, but or bad. But it can give you a place at the table for a very long time, and I think we failed to do that. And there's been an absence of arrangements. The one that's been really good and has sort of survived has been NATO, and NATO has grown, evolved, but there's also expiration dates on things, because I remember I'm sure you've had Richard Haass out. Richard, former president of the Council on Foreign Relations, just retired recently, former director of State Department Policy Planning. It's the only job I would really like to have, if anybody is listening on this great video. Really the only job I would care about. It's a George Kennan job. But Richard, when he was there, was an advocate from a conservative realist perspective when he was in that role, serving President Bush, have said we have to find a track for Russia to eventually get into NATO. If not, history will repeat itself, and we will have an us versus them dynamic. Right now, when he was saying this, Russia is a basket case. and we're humiliating Russia, or they are feeling humiliated by this moment. And as they come back, there will be a price to pay from their perspective for their identity. Now, am I with Tulsi Gabbard on all this? No. I'm talking from a Richard Haass perspective that, in fact, as you kind of look at the dynamics of global affairs, I don't think anyone had more wind behind him to change things than Obama. And I think Joe Biden, whom I've known for so long and respect so greatly, Foreign Relations Committee chair and ranking member for so long, and really he's probably our best tutored and trained and knowledgeable foreign policy practitioner. I just don't think they accomplished much. And I think in that space, you created momentum for an alternative to that just won this election. America's changing, and we're going to be very different the next 4 years. And some of you are going to ask me later, I'm happy to talk, is Donald Trump going to be a fascist? Is he going to deploy the military against his enemies within? Is he going to use the military to deport? Is Matt Gaetz really going to be Attorney General? Looks worse and worse every moment. I'm keep looking at my phone to see what's happening with the count. Peter Hegseth is a Fox News host. I mean, gives me hope for me on a cabinet one day. I know I would be better. I know how to run something. I don't know how most of them know how to run something. But I think that, God, we should probably delete that. I'm probably going to get disappeared. But I think in this arrangement, the world we're going into, there'll be some things that are, if you're political science professors again, or you've taken courses, we'll always discuss continuity and discontinuity. We're going to have significant discontinuity, significant change, the status quo. There's a guy I love, I get very wonky, named Mohammed El-Arian. He's one of the top economists in the world. He's occasionally on CNBC, and he says we're in an era, what do we call it, of the predictability of unpredictability. Meaning everything will become, it's more likely to be unpredictable than predictable. If you look at life as a bell curve, and the most probable things happen at the top of the bell curve, he said, start betting on the ends. The rarer things on both ends of that bell curve are more likely to happen. And if you go back the last 10 years when I heard Mohammed first say this, he's exactly right. Black swan moments, there are a lot of black swans, unexpected moments, unexpected things happening. And I sort of see us in that arrangement. Do I think the United States will withdraw from NATO? Probably not. But do I think that Donald Trump's going to shake down our friends and shake down our allies to pay more for protection services as you would from a New York, boss in an organized crime? Yeah. I mean, a lot of Donald Trump's patterns, I'm not saying he's an organized crime boss, but nonetheless, he behaves as a way where he spends a lot of time flirting with and chasing rivals and enemies to figure out where they're going to be. And I'll get into whether that's a good strategy or not. It might be a good strategy depending on what you care about. But then Japan, Korea, Australia, Europe writ large, anyone that exists within the kind of larger tent of U.S. protection is going to have to pay more for protection and would pay more for that alliance, because not a lot of Americans care about protecting other people right now. So to convince them, Donald Trump, just like he did with NATO and getting nations to increase their contributions and move them up to a 2% contribution level, now a lot of people are talking about 3%, is something that he takes pride in. I think it's the one thing. So I don't think we're going to withdraw, but you have to understand the dynamic with allies is never going to be kumbaya with Donald Trump. Where you'll see kumbaya stuff, which is uncomfortable, is with rivals. And we saw that with North Korea. I tell people, don't be surprised, and I don't want to shock people, but it's going to be very hard for our allies and very hard for the 49% that supported. It'll be hard for half the Republican Party, too, if there's a state dinner for Vladimir Putin in Washington in the next 4 years. I think there will be. I think that Donald Trump sees the prospect of Vladimir Putin getting that prize as a fair price to diminish his naughtiness in Eastern Europe, to not engage in war. I do believe Donald Trump is serious and authentic about really disliking military conflict. I won't call him an appeaser. He gets pretty close, though. And I think when you look at the Ukraine conflict with Russia, and this is where I have to be careful, because Donald Trump may already be negotiating some things that I largely support, and we can get into that, which is to figure out a way that both sides, in a way, can find a way through this. It doesn't mean justice has been served, but when you've got a war and conflict with the American public and a lot of Europeans are exhausted and you have this, you're going to have to kind of deal with realities there. And so I don't look at that as appeasement, but basically getting every inch back of Ukrainian soil is probably not going to be a likely outcome in this moment. But that's different than Donald Trump just cutting off Zelensky and cutting off aid and support and saying, you're on your own, or you're just on your own with Europe. So that is the way Donald Trump would talk about it. He would talk about cutting it off. You hear Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz and other people talk about wanting to cut off aid tomorrow and demeaning Zelensky and blaming the Ukrainians for this invasion, which I find to be really abhorrent. A little sidetrack, Ursula von der Leyen, the new president of the European, well, no, the renewed president of the European Commission, was with her a few weeks ago in Prague, and she spoke at a GLOBSEC gathering. I'm on the board of GLOBSEC, and it's an Eastern European, Bratislava, Slovakia-based think tank that's now moved to Prague because Bratislava, Slovakia, and the new prime minister doesn't like international institutions. They have their own populism, making things uncomfortable, which we can get into. But Ursula von der Leyen made a very good point, and she basically referenced Viktor Orban in Hungary, who was sort of blaming Ukraine for its invasion. And he says, well, it's kind of like blaming the Czechs for being invaded by the Soviets, or the Hungarians. Blame your Hungarian brethren for being invaded. She was very, very tough and threw this down. But obviously the hardline position that Ursula von der Leyen has is not the same position that Donald Trump has. He's going to try to find and promote accommodations in these conflicts. And I suspect the same thing will happen in Gaza, Israel, which we can get into in a moment. But the reason that is important is that Donald Trump is more willing than any leader I have seen to do things that most presidents wouldn't do because of the conventional bias against, of defining who is an enemy and who's a friend. And it's a very uncomfortable thing. I mean, I come out of this world too, and but Nixon went to China, and in Donald Trump's mind, he wants to be Nixon goes to China over and over and over again in a big way. And that's why I will say, watch out on Iran. I don't think he's dead set against Iran on everything. He may be because they were trying to kill him recently, but they'll figure out a way to forgive him. There could be a deal there someday. That'll be very uncomfortable for the Saudis. I mean, the biggest thing about Donald Trump is he's not loyal to any construct or relationship. He's not loyal to Netanyahu. Everybody thinks all of these things are in Donald Trump's mind that shape his worldview and perspective. He's about deals. He says he's about deals, and if he can get a good deal, he'll do it, and he'll do it in very avant-garde ways. And that's going to be hard for the strategic industry I'm part of to deal with, because we don't know how to process it. And you don't know how to arm for it. You don't know, does your defense budget go up or down? He wants it to go up, but he also wants to cut taxes, and he doesn't want the debt go up. So there are a lot of contradictions that give you an opportunity to blame one of the corners that don't work very well. The allies. So many of you were told, we had a little pre-dinner that a lot of you weren't invited to. And at the pre-dinner, we're talking about how allies are looking at us, and I have the privilege of going around the world. A lot of our allies are scratching their heads saying, what's going on? What is this America? But there are a lot of allies that say, you know, Joe Biden is bland. Or American leadership, you don't know really quite where they stand. There's a lot of blather. There's like, you know, what are you really serious about? You know, they're watching the Gaza crisis. Doesn't Israel depend on you for everything, basically? And do you not have the ability to control Netanyahu, or at least, you know, give him a bad nightmare or something? And so the world is seeing a kind of fuzzy America in some places, not sure whether it will fulfill its deals. It's seen America not follow through, like within the red line with Syria. And so there's doubt. And I wrote a piece a long time ago, well before it was a fad, to say you can watch the sense in the world of what they see as American strategic contraction by not just looking at enemies, but by looking at allies. And so I looked at 4 countries at the time. This is over 10, 12 years ago: Saudi Arabia and Israel, and Japan and Germany. And I said all four of them are behaving differently than they would if they fully trusted America to be there on their dark days. They're all hedging their bets. They're all behaving differently. You're seeing China fill in some of this space diplomatically, as it did in developing rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And China's sort of sitting there, lurking, waiting for mistakes that it can just kind of come in on the cheap and take advantage of it. So there's a lot of those things going on. And in that hedging business, it means that the world is going to be unstable. And it means that there are going to be pockets and voids. And in those pockets and voids, sometimes you get collisions and violence and things pop in. And so I think we're going to be in that space for quite a while. The other element, just to kind of go back to where I started, which is how did we get here, of looking at very long forever wars that were kind of forgotten about for a long time in Afghanistan and Iraq, offshoring, the kind of, gutting of America's manufacturing base, which maybe, they're trying to bring it back, the 08-09 financial crisis. And I remember interviewing Joe Biden, President Biden, in 2016 when he wasn't going to run, and Hillary Clinton and Trump were just going at it. And he said, Steve, and it's in the Atlantic, he said, the Democratic Party has a problem. It's become a party of snobs. And he said that in 2016, on the record, I put it out there. But if you go back, now whether you are in the Democratic Party and think you're a party of snobs or not, I don't know. But the perception of snobbery or the perception of distance that is something that's really fascinating to watch. Because in this election, you had many black male working class, many Hispanic male working class, overwhelmingly white male working class went for Donald Trump. And because they sort of feel like that's the place where that brand of work gets respect. And it's just something I want to put on the table. We can wrestle over it if you like. To look through a little bit on some of the things that Donald Trump has already said he's going to do, we know a lot by looking at the people he's selecting. What do you think of Matt Gaetz? I actually have a picture of myself with Matt Gaetz on the phone. I'm happy to show it to anybody. I took it at a Barbie party at the UK Embassy. He's in a pink tie and everything. And I've never published it anywhere because I knew it might not be a good thing. It was a little selfie. I take selfies with people. And I have it there. And last night it was back at the British Embassy, the British Ambassador's residence last night, because she threw, Karen Pierce threw this big party for Wicked. Says it was, some of it was there. So we had a party for Wicked, which is coming out. And Congressman Mike McCall was there, who's a Republican. But I showed him this, and he said, Steve, you can't show that to anyone. And I said, this is my get out of jail free card if he gets through as the Attorney General. So selfies, you just save them for the right moment. But look, Matt Gaetz is complicated. And you ask yourself, why Matt Gaetz for that job? Well, it's obvious to me. Matt Gaetz is engaged in, has been on the other side of appropriate legal behavior, and some might argue that Donald Trump, with 34 convictions and lots of other hanging things, wants somebody who understands empathetically where he is in that job. And I think it's very clear that Donald Trump wants to control the Department of Justice. It's one of his main fears, and so he wants someone there to do that. That's going to be something very hard for a lot of Americans to do. Does that mean the FBI is coming undone, that it's all going to be going after enemies? I don't know yet, and I think he is a vendetta-driven revenge guy, but I get the sense that Donald Trump, and I could be very wrong on this, and I'm going to have to call and get this cut. Winning as decisively as he did, fair and square, may change his sense of confidence about who and what he is. He always felt he was being challenged, and his legitimacy was being challenged when he was president before. The Russian dossier, people saying that if a flip of 46,000 votes would have undermined him, that he was a surprise candidate. And he didn't think so. He's always been struggling for legitimacy. He clearly has it now. He won overwhelmingly the Electoral College. He did not win overwhelmingly the popular vote, but he won everything fair and square. And that may make him potentially, and I want everyone to tell him this if you know him well, it gives him an opportunity to be magnanimous and to change the discussion into things that Americans really care about. He won because Americans believed that he cared more about the economic conditions they were in than the Harris ticket could do. Whether they're right or not, if he goes off course and doesn't care about those issues at all, then you're going to have it. And the way he's packaged, helping working Americans is, let's shut off immigration from the border, illegal immigration at the border, but it's a huge amount of American lower-end immigration. And let's put a bunch of tariffs up. Let's put tariffs up because that will protect American jobs and workers in manufacturing. And those things are designed in a way, very blunt instruments to try and drive up wages and to give people the sense that he's done something tangible to address it. I think they are filled with problems, and they're going to be filled with controversies. But I can tell you some things. Robert Lighthizer, who was U.S. Trade Representative, is in the mix. He hasn't been announced for anything yet. He's likely to be some kind of trade czar above all trade issues with U.S. Trade Representative, and even above some trade issues at Commerce. And I worked with Bob for 30 years. He's a serious guy. You're not going to talk him out of tariffs. They're going to do tariffs. The question is, how do you make tariffs smart if you're going to do them, as opposed to dumb, where you end up alienating not only China, but all of our allies as well. And I think that's another big challenge. You've got Lutnick in at Commerce, and people are saying, oh, we've got this guy from Cantor Fitzgerald there. Well, believe me, I think he's there just to make Elizabeth Warren angry. We can get into why that is, but Elizabeth Warren doesn't like people from financial markets. But Donald Trump doesn't like people from financial markets. So he's there as a placeholder for, he's a rich guy, raised a lot of money, I don't think he'll have any power. We don't know who's going to be Treasury Secretary, probably Kevin Warsh, who's more of a traditional big finance guy. But it does show that some of the other more dynamic and provocative players, a guy named John Paulson, if any of you are in finance, probably not getting that slot, which is interesting. And he left his wife for a younger woman. I thought, recently that might help him, in this race. Hegseth, Fox News contributor, has been around. Bret Baier, who I really respect, likes him, and I think he implied. I won't say this, that Bret said this, so I'm not going to say that since we're on the record here. But he would say that what he really needs is a very, very good number two who really knows the Pentagon. That the biggest flaw in most of Donald Trump's selectees so far is they don't know how to run a system. They don't know how to run a building or a bureaucracy or a system out there. So that's one of the things that's out there with some doubts. But I imagine he might get in. Tulsi Gabbard, head of national intelligence. A lot out there. I'll let you Google it. I know Tulsi. I feel awkward about Tulsi Gabbard because I admired her willingness to kind of be the person standing against the tank a number of times and be contrarian in foreign policy. I love contrarians. I respect them. She went beyond contrarianism to advocacy of players that I think are pretty nefarious. That's my problem with Tulsi Gabbard, not that she sees Russia differently or some of the legacies of these conflicts differently. It's very useful to go back and look at the legacies behind some of the conflicts we're in. Say, how in the heck did we get here? It's not just the other guy that was wrong. We contributed. We're complicit. Many of you are in foreign service. I just interviewed on my Al Jazeera show 2 wonderful State Department people, one who had been in the Bureau of Political Military Affairs, and the other was a country expert on Middle East. And they both resigned over Israel-Gaza, saying the United States is not living up to the standards and laws it has in place on humanitarian requirements when we transfer weapons to any other allies. And we are lying about it, we're deceiving it. She used information, she used language on my show saying we're engaged in disinformation. Well, to hear a very principled, capable woman from the State Department say that Joe Biden and Tony Blinken and others are engaged in disinformation, when we've been taught right now to say the disinformers were the Republicans and the holders of truth were the Democrats. It's really eye-opening, and it gives you a little different context to understand that everybody's got a different place in this. And I think that I admire contrarians. They were contrarians, and they resigned. If you all want to see it just out, it's just Google bottom line and my name, and it should come up on YouTube, and you can watch this show on Al Jazeera. Very powerful show. But in that space, they are out there, and Israel-Gaza is one of these conflicts where I think Trump is going to come along. And I think Donald Trump is going to want it to end, and I think he knows, because he wants a relationship with Saudi and Mohammed bin Salman, he can't let Bibi Netanyahu just mow the people over or just expel them. That's what I think a lot in Israel want to do, to be honest. but I don't think you can do that and hold the Arab side of the equation together. But I don't think he's going to become a peacemaker or a believer in a two-state solution and come in and be the rescuer either. So we're going to get to a different equilibrium of some messy kind on that will be slightly better where we're at, where you haven't had 44,000 people killed in a year, but it'll be something messy. And in that process, though, you have to ask yourself, how did that just impact this election? And the truth is, younger people today don't have the geostrategic map in their heads or the social contract and foreign policy that most of us do. Many of us know the Cold War. We know what the Middle East looked like. You have the legacy of the wars. You knew who won Nobel Peace Prizes for trying to solve this conflict. Or you knew how everybody kind of fit within certain patterns so that you could get alliances to kind of punish bad behavior. That world doesn't exist anymore. And young people say, why are we subscribing to wars and conflicts in the way that our grandparents or great-grandparents are doing that? And there's a generational change in perspective that's very, very important. And it's important, I think, to come back and have a conversation, which I don't think Joe Biden has done enough with, about what should Americans care about and why. Why does America playing these role, the role in the world that we're playing really matter in Ukraine? Why is he doing the one-sided, it's kind of like a one-sided thing where you're supporting Israel with 2,000-pound bombs and you keep talking about the impact on Palestinians and hoping to get them, humanitarian aid and whatnot. It's a messy situation, and I think if I were to say one of the worst things for the Biden-Kamala Harris team this last year was that year of that conflict. And do I believe that Bibi Netanyahu milked this for that? I won't go that far. October 7th, I don't believe was his fault entirely, but you have a situation where October 7th and the horror of what Hamas did was a trigger purposely designed to create the kind of overreactions that I believe America engaged in to some degree after 9/11. Part of what terrorism does, some of you are experts on terrorism, is to draw out that reaction because they're trying in their monstrous way to look legitimate in the eyes of people that are pissed off about something or have grievances on something. And so Hamas has become far more legitimate in its eyes on the Arab street and of Palestinians than it was before. They have not been blamed for this conflict. So it's a real mess. But I think the bigger thing is when you saw students protesting around college campuses, some of it was authentic, some of it was engineered by outside players. And I do believe that you have both a kind of anti-Semitism growing in the United States and at the same time an Islamophobia growing, and they're feeding on each other. And so I think there's a lot of extremism on both sides feeding each other in these various things. But the failure of the Biden team to get control of that made it look impotent. Impotence is not good at an election. And I think that impotence, because you've got to go back now and look at the popular vote. Where did 8 million votes go? Or how many million? Kamala Harris did not win as many votes as Joe Biden did. There are millions different. Only a couple of million votes separate Trump and Kamala Harris. Now, you got to pay attention not to the national vote, but to electoral college, but still the national vote. Millions of people did not vote. Was it because they didn't buy her economic opportunity program economy, or was it things like the Gaza crisis, or the sense of impotence, or the sense of not knowing her? It may be all of those things, but I think it's part of it. There are a lot of things I could get into, more in Ukraine, Africa, North Korea, South Korea, etc. I mentioned that we're going to have just real shocks, but probably the biggest shock we're going to have are people that are really big and active in climate change remediation or climate change activism. I can't imagine the biggest loser in this election is our works on climate change, because you can see that in the appointments in the Department of Energy, you can see it in the orientation of the president, you can see it in virtually everything, that the next 4 years are going to be major oil drilling, major fossil fuel development. And I think, and I told some friends, I did an energy thing the other day on how do you work around that. And while the Trump crowd likes fossil fuels and coal, they also like nuclear. Nuclear develops a lot of bad product, but it's nonetheless doesn't contribute carbon in the air. So you're going to see a big surge, I think, in the nuclear world as a way to safeguard some of the climate targets. But you're going to see less investment in solar, winds, biofuels, all of that coming undone. And I think it's gut-wrenching for a lot of people who've tried to build global momentum. We've just seen a lot of this come undone recently. I'm losing my voice in that. So it's going to be messy. But again, I believe in waiting to see if I'm right or wrong. Are they going to really undo these things? There's a book by Michael Lewis. Have any of you read The Fifth Risk? So The Fifth Risk, you should get him as a speaker if you can. That's the most prescient book ever written because it was basically written as Donald Trump was coming in about what will the neutering of expertise do deep in the performance administrations, the agencies for weather, for highway administration, for whatever it may be. And, you know, when he wrote it the first time and you saw the Trump administration come in, you saw the Trump administration had a lot of limits on how deep they could go in carving away and getting rid of people. Now I think they figured that out. That's my biggest worry, candidly, in government, is the death of expertise or the exiling of expertise. Brookings is not big enough for everyone who will need a job in that thing, and you have a lot of people there. And I'll put, just end this. Somebody said, please end on a happy note. I can't do that. I can end on a realistic note. In fact, I can tell you that there is a friend of mine named Kevin Barron, who's a great journalist. He was the executive editor of Defense One for a long time. He invited me to a party tomorrow night in Washington, a birthday party, and he said, how's the post-election mood? And I said, I'm a realist, as you know, so I don't get lost in crushed dreams. And he wrote back, I don't get lost in crushed dreams sounds like a great Ariana Grande song. So why don't I end there on that positive, happy, uplifting note, and would love to have a conversation with you and take questions, hear your thoughts, have you take me on and tell me where I'm wrong or whatever. But those are my thoughts on the election foreign policy right now. So thank you.
Thank you. Do you think that Elon Musk will mitigate some of his anti-solar, anti-EV rhetoric? And also, what do you think about that relationship for space exploration?
So Elon Musk is an enigma to me. I mean, it's kind of like the Leonardo da Vinci of our times. You should never let da Vinci get too rich. And but when you have genius, which Musk is a genius, with that much money, they're socially uncontrollable, and you can't expect the system to easily homogenize a Musk. Your question's hard. I don't know. I've interviewed Elon Musk 3 times, and I remember interviewing. I said, "What do you feel are your constraints?" And he says, "There's only one constraint on me," and he says, "Physics." Interesting and appropriate answer in a way, but he didn't see law. He didn't see these other things. So when you kind of look at it, I think his gamesmanship on EVs and solar and issues is a temporary game, because clearly he's invested so much in that arena that his antipathy to it is completely contrived, right? It's a temporary political moment. His cousins, he bailed out. I forgot what their company was. I interviewed his cousins once that had one of the big solar companies in the United States. They were going bankrupt. He bailed them out. It's another one of the big solar footprints he has. And of course, that's what the basis of Tesla is. So I think that he looks at these things in a way there. I don't think, it's very hard for me to answer what's going to temper Elon Musk on anything until one of 2 things happens. The next administration comes in and challenges him with real jail time or some sort of serious infraction of such scale that the billionaire could end up in jail for something. Not likely to happen. But the others that seems to be happening is that Elon is wearing out his welcome in Trump land, that his obnoxious, self-centered narcissism that he delivered the presidency to Donald Trump. The one thing that gets under Donald Trump's skin is anyone that thinks they made him. Look at what he did to the Murdochs and Fox News. They used to say, we made Donald Trump. You can't become the leader of the United States without going through Fox. Well, Donald Trump, every time, I tell you, he looks at that. I mean, he's an alpha and an apex predator. He's King Kong. And he will come out and he can't help himself. And the 2 of them will have some historic collision that I hope I get the rights to in Netflix. And so that will be the complication for Elon Musk, who will, find it. Or you can find, I'll tell you some other things I think about Elon Musk. What will the international world do? What will Europe do? Europe is a powerhouse regulator, and they're a powerhouse penalizer. And if you got Elon Musk with the Starlink, turning it off at the request of China or Putin to knock out communications for Taiwan, there's a conflict, or things related to Ukraine and Russia. And Elon is cutting private deals with foreign autocrats and dictators in this kind of thing. Guess who's going to come after him? Europe. And so I can imagine penalties in the hundreds of billions of dollars, or something like that. Could change the game, for him in certain ways. And I'm not saying that will happen, but anybody that uses global public infrastructure, remember, all of Elon's companies were started by U.S. taxpayers. I was there interviewing Stephen Chu, the former Secretary of Energy, on stage with Elon Musk when Elon Musk gave him a check and returned the loan and paid off the loans that the Department of Energy had made to Elon's early companies. So, we were part of the DNA of that. And so there's a kind of, doesn't give us rights, but there gives this kind of question about what's the social contract for appropriate and responsible behavior when you're mixing all of these different things. And whether it's Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it. So anyway, long answer to your very good question, but I think that in the end, the only thing that will temper Elon Musk is collisions with either Trump or collisions with the law or collisions with fines from Europe. Yes. Oh, yes. Oh, I've got to go where the mic is. They'll come back. Okay. Great. And I'll go lightning round so we can get tons of questions in. Yes. Hi.
Oh, hi. So I was reading an article. It was an opinion piece in the New York Times by Chuck Hagel.
Yeah.
And he said his big worry is the military becoming politicized.
Yes.
And as a parent.
So I love Chuck Hagel.
Yeah. As a parent of a ROTC, Air Force ROTC candidate, I'm interested in your thoughts.
I listen to everything that Chuck says, and I think that article is extremely important, and that Senator/Secretary Hagel is outlining, he was a sergeant. He was an enlisted man. When I interviewed him, I did a thing called Sergeant Hagel Speaks, when he was Defense Secretary. And he is worried that all of those things that made the military a professional, nonpartisan, merit-based system that began to solve a lot of problems. So when Chuck was there, what were some of the things they did? They really moved forward the legal processes for sexual violence towards women. Trump's people want to undo a lot of that. Ash Carter, who came up after Hagel, was the one who helped get transgendered service in the military. I remember John McCain saying, I want to honor any American who wants to serve his nation or her nation. I don't care if they're trans or not. So John McCain was in a very different place, this great warrior in a very different place. And there's, because this professional code of conduct, et cetera, at certain levels, was something that is worshiped there. But if you're coming in and creating basically panels, political panels to come in and purge generals for their views or their perspectives, then you're beginning to create a deeply politicized military. So I believe Chuck has a point. It's great he's putting that out there. Maybe that will help deter this from actually happening. I've talked to Mark Milley. Mark is not going to be on Donald Trump's Christmas card list. And Mark Milley, I asked Mark Milley, we're on a plane to Doha, what do you worry about your combatant commanders and people down further in the rank who are rising up, becoming victims to this kind of thing? This is before Chuck Hagel's comment. And he said, no, I don't, because the system of promotions, of bringing in, that everyone is good and understands the code of conduct well. So I have those two images. One, what Milley said, confidence in the system and the resilience of it. I hear Chuck Hagel saying, we got to be careful because they understand how to undo many of the things and to create political consequences for the careers of people who are incredible leaders in the country, and begin changing what their incentive structure is about who and why they follow the commander-in-chief. And then it begins to change the most important question. I remember asking the head of U.S. Strategic Command at the Halifax International Security Forum, this general, so he's the head of all our nuclear forces, that if he were to get an order from Donald Trump to launch a nuclear conflict, that he would be the last human being to talk to Donald Trump before that decision was made. What would he say? What would he want to hear? What would he say? And he paused and he said, I will not follow an illegal order. Powerful. Made the front page every because it was the comment from the military saying to Donald Trump, you got to follow the rules and follow the system. Donald Trump hated it. The guy was not in his job long. But that was an interesting moment, that if that changed to I will do what I'm told, then you're in a very different era. So I can't tell you whether Chuck was right or wrong, but I can tell you that Chuck Hagel wrote that. He's a man of few words, and Chuck is not overexposed. And so when you write something like that, I think it's worth paying attention to.
Our next question's here,
Yeah,
and then
sorry.
we'll.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. How Donald Trump's transcripts from the University of Pennsylvania contained several Fs, and he has 22 businesses that he ran.
Was he partner with you in any of them?
No. Do you think those characteristics? What do you think of those characteristics?
Look, I think that he failed in a lot of things. He succeeded in becoming one of America's most popular celebrities through TV. It's shown celebrity has changed everything. That's what Marjorie Taylor Greene is doing. That's what Matt Gaetz are doing. They want to be celebrities that take their box they're on, get on social media, raise millions and millions of dollars. Any normal, pragmatic, who's the person here? Is it Jason Crow? Who's local? I love Jason Crow, but Jason Crow can't get out on social media and raise, $10 million on a weekend. I love him, and he's fantastic. But the performance art of Donald Trump and of being incredibly pugnacious the way he is, and even, I didn't know what gaslighting meant until Donald Trump. So if you know what gaslighting is, you get convinced that something's the way it is when it's not. And Donald Trump is really good with a lot of Americans of asserting things that are wrong. I followed Donald Trump one time when he was talking about immigration, the border. This is when he was running the first time. And I think we were in Phoenix, and then we were in Denver. We did something like 3 speeches in 2 days. And all the 3 different points he made were completely contradictory, but nobody held him accountable to them. I mean, they were completely contradictory, so it didn't matter. So in a way, truth, facts, things he said began to matter and matter less, and just more to the behavior art of Donald Trump being this pugnacious, angry person that was somehow connecting with a lot of other people that were angry. So for some reason, the only people that worry about Donald Trump's business failures are part of that Northeast financial establishment, that Ivy League crowd, who measure and grade performance on those levels. My relatives in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, just don't care that much. So unfortunate, but true.
Yes, I would be interested on your perspective on North Korea, the troops in Ukraine, the relationship with Putin, and obviously they're getting something out of the relationship.
Look, I think it's a really great question. I can tell you the imponderable. Some of you are strategists and have thought of this. I don't know how much these leaders want to be coddled and whatnot by Donald Trump. So I think Kim Jong-un preserved himself and his power and situation longer because of Donald Trump, their love, their brotherly love. And you can ask, okay, but did we get a nuclear conflict? Did Donald Trump stop their missile development? No. But maybe the thing that I have to ask myself is, did Donald Trump succeed in stopping some worse conflict in some way with this? And I can't answer that. We didn't have the conflict, so it's hard to prove a negative. So I think that that it's there. But if Donald Trump coming back now, is he going to want to cuddle up with Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin? Does Vladimir Putin really want to be buddies with America? What signals does that send? Does he really want to get out of messing with Moldova and the Baltics and the Balkans? Does he want to get out of the business? Because that's going to be part of the price that I think Trump is going to expect. Is you're not going to embarrass Trump, right? What Trump's comment was, if he were president, Putin would not have done it out of value of their friendship. He personalizes everything. Now, I think that's baloney. I don't think that leaders matter at that level. And so, at a certain level, I think that what is more likely to happen, and we'll see whether I'm right or wrong the next time I come out here, is both of those rogue countries are going to test the limits militarily, economically. Remember, we haven't talked about the BRICS, but the BRICS are a very, very important development in the world where they are organizing Brazil, Russia, India, China, but there are a lot of UAEs in it. There are other members, Saudi sort of half in, half out. But it's organized in such a way to challenge essentially the West and America's dominance of the global financial order, the reserve currency status of the dollar, the SWIFT system that we've sanctioned so much. We're very good sanctioners, but we've left so many sanctions, and there's so many areas out there that has created resistance. And again, going back to feeling humiliated, left out, a lot of these countries feel powerless and irritated that America has the ability, from their perspective, with impunity, to just apply these sanctions and move them along. So the BRICS are coming along, and Russia's part of that. And so I suspect, while we're trained to think about military conflicts as being the way testing, I think Russia and some of these other countries are going to test us with economic challenges to American primacy in that space. And I also think that the kind of tools that they've developed in hybrid conflict with disinformation and other things are going to become much more pronounced and sophisticated, not in the United States, but elsewhere around the world. And that's going to test alliances and relationships. Now, if you're Donald Trump, you don't care about those countries. But if you care about, Henry Kissinger used to tell me, he says, the world is a game of Go. It's black chips and white chips. You're getting more territory and control than they are, or they get more control and territory. And if they begin moving, then Donald Trump's going to be in trouble. You also have to remember, this is something I tell people, I don't hyperventilate about Trump, but a lot of people do. And he's got 2 years. 2 years. 2 years to go get his enemies, 2 years to fire all those bureaucrats, 2 years to kind of hang out with Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un. He's got 2 years before he's a lame duck now, but he's a real lame duck in 2 years. And people say, well, he's going to change the Constitution and stay in there forever. No, he's not. Can't change the Constitution in 2 years. So that's not going to happen. And in that space, does it not mean that there are not going to be challenges on Obamacare, on IRA, on all of these other things? Yeah, there will be. But I think that it's important to remember that the world is not going to change entirely. It'll change some. But Putin is also an apex predator. Right? And so apex predators are taking advantage of each other a moment, like, what was it, King Kong and Godzilla in that movie, but they don't fundamentally like hanging out, right? So we're going to see what happens. Yeah. You guys are liking this. If anybody doesn't, yeah. But
you've expressed the fact that there are some changes that are necessary internationally. And I sense a little hope that maybe Donald Trump will actually make some of those changes. For example, we would love to see him find a way to end the Ukrainian war.
yes.
But I've watched Donald Trump on television for years now, and we all have. And what he says, his words, his sentences make less and less sense. It seems to me that to execute any sort of logical foreign policy, to change the objective, you need the mental capacity to execute. And I think we've all seen, whether you agree with him or not, we've seen an increasing diminishment in his mental capacity, just as we did with Biden. Is he really going to be capable of executing a logical strategy?
So I don't know. He doesn't educate many, or he doesn't develop or execute many plans consistently anyway. So the inconsistency will seem normal rather than consistency. But what I'll say seriously is Donald Trump's linguistic performance has improved a little bit since the election. But But I'll tell you, Maggie Haberman and David Sanger of the New York Times, when they first interviewed Donald Trump, did something magical that the media stopped doing, which is they ran a transcript in the New York Times of everything Donald Trump said the way he said it. And it was a mishmash of completely unintelligible material and information. And we in the media stopped doing that. We began trying to figure out what Donald Trump was really saying and then tell the American public that's what he meant. We were creating clarity for him. In fact, it was in the David Sanger interview, I reminded him recently, where Donald Trump didn't use the words America first. He was describing something in a very kind of roundabout way. And David Sanger says, that sounds like America first. And so Donald Trump said, yeah, I'm America first. So it was actually a New York Times reporter who gave the whole brand to Donald Trump. But your point's really important. I don't know how to measure Donald Trump's clarity. I know that he's very focused on trade, very focused on tariffs. He wants to renegotiate a number of things and name them Trump successes. That's what he's obsessed with. And I tell everybody, don't look at the president and that individual too much. Look at the franchise of people around them. What will Marco Rubio do in that circumstance? We know the danger, if you will, of Donald Trump in the way you described him is there are going to be fewer guardrails around Donald Trump. They've decided to let Trump be Trump. Let's rip up the South Korea-U.S. free trade agreement overnight. Now, Gary Cohn, who was his guy back then, didn't allow that to happen. There's going to be less protection for America's deals around the world if Donald Trump has a fit of rage, or if he wants to declassify something, or do whatever Donald Trump wants to do. And that may be a function of his cognitive state. I don't know. But I do know that Marco Rubio is not an idiot. Marco Rubio's been around. I don't agree with everything he has, but he's going to, I think there is some element of structure and whatnot. And Donald Trump is easily bored by things. He's got attention deficit disorder like you can't believe, and he likes to see things in pictures, and he doesn't read. So in that space, you've got a situation, and I'm not saying that negatively, it's just the way he is. We know that the most compelling successes with him have been visual, and he remembers people visually, but he's not a reader, he's not a report reader. So in that world, when you talk about how do you then communicate and manage a big system and implementation if you're not a writer, you're not a reader? Obama was highly literate. He wrote incredibly detailed stuff, wrote these books, best-selling books. That's not Donald Trump. So, but when you kind of look at a way a system works, that system is going to have competencies and incompetencies. But I think that when I say what's got to change, I know that Donald Trump is more of a hyper-realist than Nixon was, or a Nixon and Kissinger who want to look beyond this whole question about what is America's power and purpose in the world going to be focused on, as opposed to what we have today, I think, in the impression of Donald Trump. And I largely agree with this. I agree with Trump that America has sprawling capacity and power around the world that it doesn't know what to do with, and that is often hijacked by other players in a way that has questionable utility for America's core national security, that we need to refocus our attentions. And part of that has to be a conversation with the American public about why being engaged in the world matters broadly for the world, but also matters to them, so that we don't end up in a dysfunctional situation before where Americans felt like they were sacrificing for global security, but somehow China became this Chinese economic juggernaut at their expense. That's where Donald Trump in that terrain makes a little bit of sense to me. I just want to make sure they don't destroy everything in the process of getting there. Oh. That's very sweet.
Next question.
But I only want one job, Director of State, Department of State Policy Planning. I had offered two jobs, one by Republican George Bush and one by Bill Clinton's administration, where they want to be spokesperson for U.S. Trade Representative office. And I asked them, I said, why do you want me to be the spokes? Because they knew I knew about trade policy, but you want me to be the spokes? I want to be the policy guy. I just want to be a mouthpiece. But both of them came to me separately and distinct with the same job. So something I was doing appealed to the USTR itch. And I was so irritated by that. And I said, no, never. So, yeah. And do you guys mind if I walk over here in a minute, even though the camera's going, I'm going to get a cup of coffee? All right.
Go for it.
Is that okay? No, go ahead, speak.
Okay. Well, thanks for being here, and you're a very good speaker.
I don't agree with you. To me, Trump wants to be a dictator, and I can't keep up. You've covered so many subjects, but you condemn Musk, and then you support or speculate on what Trump's going to do.
I didn't condemn
They're
Musk that much. I
exactly
think
the
he's just a
same
genius with too
type
much
of
money.
people.
So go ahead.
I'm sorry. I didn't. If you said something meaningful, I didn't hear it. What I'm saying is, I mean, the thing I can you're. There's a word for it, but you're an enabler of Trump.
I'm an
And-
enabler?
Yes. And I mean, Trump is a dictator.
I know he doesn't think that.
No, I know, but what I'm saying is, I do not want to see him become an Orban, where Hungary is part of NATO. Hungary is supposedly down.
So
If you look at, wait,
Yeah.
please, if you look at the back of how Hungary is and what it is now and how Orban did it, and you look at what Trump is putting in place, it's exactly the same thing. And the other, as I say, the Musk thing is very interesting. They're both the same personalities. They want to be in charge. You denigrate Musk and you support Trump. And you say, well, let's see what he did. Well, we saw for 4 years what he did. And what I'm concerned about is he's going to create a lot. The West is losing. We did a Marshall Plan on China.
right,
And it was the whole West that did it.
right.
It was Europe, it was the Asian West, and Japan and Taiwan and all those people, and the United States. And they are, I mean, they may be struggling right now, but they're forming a NATO alliance with China, Russia, North Korea.
Right.
They're doing what we did. And I'm sorry, but anyway, I like to.
No, I appreciate, and I'm glad you're challenging me. You know, I will be honest, I have a husband. My husband thinks exactly like you do about me. Yeah. I think you'd like me too. I mean, but I think that, to be honest, let me say this. You're further along in this journey of views on Trump than I am, in the sense that I have written about it, so there's a lot about me you haven't seen and read about my profile. You haven't necessarily watched my TV show, where I've been worried about authoritarianism coming to America, worried about what I was very close with Madeleine Albright, who wrote a book on fascism, and she said, Steve, fascists are elected. We have to be careful that democracy is just not election, it's institutions and all these other things. And so I say all that, but when I come in and talk to an audience where I don't know, I want to talk to them about this in a way where it's not me being a flamboyant person on one stream or the other saying, I completely reject this, because 76 million people somehow got behind this guy, and I need to understand why. Do they want to give up democracy and freedom? Do they want to see journalists thrown in jail? But here's where I am try to be a little different, not an enabler, but I try to be a pox on all their houses kind of guy, where I was very irritated with Eric Holder and Barack Obama for the harassment and treatment of journalists during their time. Jim Risen of the New York Times, good friend of mine, threatened over sources. You began to see America set a tone on its approach to journalists and journalism that I think they corrected, but the world saw it. And when you began looking at wrongly detained journalists, harassment of journalists, killing of journalists globally, and you began seeing this expand. So I try to go back and say, it's not just Donald Trump being a monster. There were precedents that came before. Your views on Viktor Orban, you and I couldn't be more on the same page. I detest Viktor Orban. I applaud Ursula von der Leyen. I am a proud friend of George and Alex Soros. I see the anti-Semitism and Soros obsessions there. Tucker Carlson is a puppet in things. I don't know how a guy who used to be the alternative voice on CNN's Crossfire became a kind of monstrous personality. So all I'm trying to say is Donald Trump ran with a ton of votes. Matt Gaetz, in my view, is a monstrous choice. A Marco Rubio is not a monstrous choice. He may be a problematic choice, may not, but I don't know if he's an enabler of a fascist or not. If I look at a guy named Stephen Miller, whom we've not discussed, I can't imagine anyone I am more diametrically and antithetically opposed. And when they basically said America is for Americans, Germany is for Germany, they didn't say Germany is for Germany's, but that's what they're playing to, which is the Nazi rhetoric of what they were doing. So I wrote about that. So there's a lot of that you haven't known. But I tried to say, now he's president of the United States. President Biden met him in his office. There's going to be a peaceful transfer of power. I want to create the conditions where this guy somehow finds, out of the confidence that he won fair and square, the ability, now maybe I'm being naive, to behave responsibly. I know you think it, behave responsibly. Now, I'll tell you the same thing. I wish the camera would go up, but I'll tell you this. There's a friend of mine. I'm on the board of National Interest now. I write articles, for National Interest. And one of my buddies there, very, very big Biden proponent, and really saw Biden ushering in a new era and Kamala Harris inheriting that era and coming in and doing really well. And I called him the night before the election, the editor, and I said, I don't believe she's going to win. And I said, I hope for the nation, now this is where I was mistaken, as my husband was really upset at me. He said, I hope that either one of them wins decisively, because the terror in the nation will be so horrible if it's as close as everyone is pretending. But I have this gut feeling, given the way it's stacked, that Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin are going to go one way or the other. If the nation's breathing progressively that day, she wins. If they just don't buy it, they're going to breathe down, and his numbers are going to be around 47, 48%, which is pretty accurate. And it turned out to be pretty thinly. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin all went for him. They go as a group, and that was it. And I said to him, we have a lot of friends on that enemy list. I said, I'll be on that enemy list. You're definitely going to be on that enemy list. I said, do we have to get an underground railroad? So I'm not unaware or naive. I don't believe I'm Mika Brzezinski and Joe Scarborough going down and asking permission. But I'm also not putting up walls yet until I see behaviors to report on. I think for my book, and you may not agree, it's the only way I can be responsible in this moment of basically reporting on what he does and how he goes from this point forward. Because I've already reported on the horrible things he said. I've already reported on the atrociousness of talking about deploying the military. I've also talked about the crazy economics. If you're going to cut off, the secret to success in this country is being the world's brain drain problem, having smart people come up. I'm actually writing a piece right now going into the Rockefeller Foundation's archives of how the Rockefeller Foundation, which was set up as a global public health alert service, began saving Jewish intellectuals during the rise of the Nazis, who saw them beginning harassed. But inside of the Rockefeller Foundation, there were people who didn't want to have anything to do with it because it wasn't the mission of the Rockefeller Foundation. So we're very brave people, including a guy named Joseph Schumpeter. You may know the famous economic theorist. Schumpeter is probably one of the most impactful American economists of all time. And they saved many, many Jewish intellectuals. Well, I'm asking myself today, who are we not saving in this moment in many of these conflicts out there, because we have such an isolationist attitude. So I am empathetically with you, and I don't believe I'm a Trump enabler, but you can still believe I am. But I just want to respond seriously that I think it's I appreciate the comment, and it's a good caution for me, because I don't want people to think that. But I want to encourage, through the power I have, which is tiny, this guy who may listen now and then, to be a responsible person for the next few years, because America is done. And I don't believe democracy is over, and you got a chance 2 years to come back, and that's my view.
One is,
We've got our next question
Oh.
here and then another one.
Okay.
We've got one question here
Can
and
we
another
talk
one.
right after? Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. The question is about Israel.
Yeah.
And more specifically, some commentators indicate that the two-state solution is dead.
Yeah.
Credibility on Hamas and so forth have just diminished, gone away. So I'd appreciate some of your speculation on that topic.
So my North Star on this is a guy named Daniel Levy. He's head of the U.S. Middle East Project. I hired him. He was one of the negotiators many years ago, something called the Geneva Initiative, and they laid out an initiative that would go beyond Oslo and figure out how to solve this. So I hired Daniel who is the son of Lord Michael Levy in England, but he was working as an assistant to Yossi Beilin, then the Minister of Justice in Israel. And then I hired a guy from the Palestinian side named Gaith Alamari, who was working with Abu Mazen, and then a guy named Amjad Attallah, and they were all involved with Geneva. And we did this when I was at the New America Foundation during the Obama administration, because we saw an opportunity to move forward. And I put him out there because Daniel Levy is one of the smartest people. If you kind of Google him and you kind of look at him, I think he is an endless, both cynic and optimist. He's cynically realistic about where all the players are. He's optimistic that you can eventually turn this Rubik's Cube in the right direction, but right now is not the right time. But he never gives up. He absolutely never gives up. I talked to, because of my show, I talked about this conflict and people on both sides endlessly. I've talked to everybody from John Bolton on the to Mustafa Barghouti, who is one of these great potential presidents of Palestine in the future, and different people. And I would tell you that most of the people I know think that the notion of a two-state solution is so far off that they don't even know what it would look like. But you can create zones of autonomy. You can create deals on de-escalating and pulling military forces out. You can make deals that restrict Israel's ability to come back. But Israel's, the thing that Israel has a right to do is to protect itself. And if you have embedded terrorists, as you did in Hamas, to come in, that was something to say. So this is like a festering ulcer that people let go. And Jake Sullivan, not to name drop, but I saw Jake Sullivan this morning at the Hay Adams Hotel, and it reminded me that 3 or 4 days just before October 7th, Jake Sullivan said the Middle East and the Israel-Palestine situation has never been better, never been sounder, never been more stable. That's what I was reminded when I saw Jake this morning. And so I think that it's going to take a staggering amount of work, but most of us aren't going to give that work. The tragedy of Palestine is it's ignored in demean, not just by us, it's by the Arabs. I was with the Jordanian foreign minister recently. I said, and the king. It's an off-the-record thing. But I asked them, I said, are you ready to tear up? What's your leverage? Are you ready to tear up your peace deal? And the foreign minister intimated, off the record, that a lot of the Arab street wanted to do that in Jordan, but the government couldn't do that. Same with Egypt. I asked then former Foreign Minister Shukri, who was in the previous round with President Sisi, were they going to rearrange their relationship with Israel given what they saw going on? And he said, absolutely not. But we don't want any exodus of Palestinians. That's when it would get nasty. So you've got this smoldering ulcer pressure cooker that I think is going to take some other kind of leadership to come in. In my view, the United States has lost the legitimacy to play fair on both sides. So we're going to become an advocate on the Israeli side, but for a smarter, better, more humane Israel is where I think it has to go. And I hope somehow, I hope Trump will go there. Trump may say, Bibi, do what you got to do, mow him down. I don't know. But I see China, I see others eventually, potentially. Palestine needs a strong advocate that can be its total advocate behind it. And the fact is there's a lot of cowardice in the world right now, and that's not happening. So I know that's not a good answer for you, but the two-state solution, which the Saudis say they want, UAE wants, it's what's kind of embedded in some of the Abraham Accord lingo, this notion. I mean, we've got cabinet ministers in Israel that want to annex the West Bank now. So they're not going to do it, I don't think. But unless they perceive Donald Trump as so disinterested, this is my biggest fear about the coming age of Trump, is that Israel sees Donald Trump as so disinterested in not doing anything, they move now to annex and depopulate and engage in ethnic cleansing. And then on the China side, China and Xi Jinping, who I don't think had any, I don't believe the hype that China was really going to come into Taiwan. But if you create conditions that are so ripe, they are unavoidable, and you think they're historically unusual, you're not going to not take advantage of them. And so I think that the disinterest in being engaged in securing allies is a real problem in the next 4 years. And that is a thing that we've got to be very watchful of. But luckily, Marco Rubio is such a hothead and so pro-Taiwan, et cetera, that I think, maybe that's a good thing.
Steve, this has been fascinating, but one last question.
Yeah. Oh,
Oh, lucky me.
I thought we had another hour.
So everybody's talking about Trump and Putin and all this kind of stuff. And for years, I've been watching the Belt and Road. And Xi Jinping and the entire nation has been quietly weaving and knitting relationships. And then I saw a picture of the G20. And I don't know if you saw that, because President
With Biden in the back?
Biden was not anywhere to be seen, but there's Xi Jinping, and then there's Modi, and there are a couple of other people from Africa. And I'm sensing that that's more of a concern that the U.S. ought to be aware of. But I don't know that we're doing anything about it. Thoughts?
Well, we are. We have, I can't remember what the brand, the Belt and Road Initiative, it's all in our brains now. There's some form of global partnership Japan is helping with to try to create a competitive, set of networks around the world. But we're about 20 years too late. And, the big thing behind that is China has been so single-mindedly focused on making sure that it has the relationships and the deals, particularly around critical materials and materials it needs. And so it's, it's energy, it's lithium, it's nickel and cobalt, and all sorts of other rare earths and precious metals and materials. And so we're now in a, the U.S. government has a multi-agency task force to kind of go in and try to catch up, get control, because, China controls about 80% of much of the material needed in the EV green energy transition side. We're trying to, I've been very involved with the kind of critical materials crowd in Washington, and you try to put together a Belt and Road Initiative or economic partnerships, but sometimes you have to do so with messy countries. And I think one of the really, you're good ones to talk about. If you're going to, I'll give you an example. A company called Glencore has two of the most efficient and important cobalt mining operations in the DRC. But there are real issues about child labor, about mining conditions, not in their minings, but China has 11 mines surrounding these other mines, and it's awful conditions. But somehow in the process of this, human rights groups and others have begun to kind of create a lot of pressure on America moving out of there. Well, we need that stuff. And if you begin doing it, and the other thing that's happened right now, China so controls global commodities and prices. And right now we have too much. And so the prices of all these things have collapsed at levels. And so businesses can't run. They're buying up businesses all around the world. We should be buying up business.
Deep sea mining.
Yeah, what's that?
And you're doing the deep sea mining.
Yeah.
We're not even involved.
Right. Well, I know people that want to be involved, but what your point is correct, that China has for a long time been pursuing its interests pretty clearly, and the U.S. is now trying to catch up. I think there are people that are interested in it. We're just behind, but I also think we're a great power. We sometimes invent our way out of these things. And Robert Lighthizer, is the kind of person, not to enable Trump, to go back to the other gentleman's comment, but I like Bob Lighthizer. I don't agree with him on tariffs and anything, but I know that guy has one of the most sophisticated understandings of how to build the U.S. system. Now, I think he is an industrial policy obsessive, and I don't know if America knows how to do industrial policy that well, to tell you the truth. It's not in our DNA, but we're trying to do it. But if a guy is going to do it, whether it was under a Democratic administration or Republican administration, Lighthizer is the right guy. What I don't know is if Donald Trump flips towards these distractions, this authoritarianism, all of these other kinds of things, it probably takes us out of the global race on a lot of this stuff, and it leaves the field much more open to China. And I'll tell you the other thing, that's the most important thing about it, is that if you look at the future of the middle class in the world, where it's growing, where is the net middle class coming from? It's not coming from the United States or Europe. It's coming from Southeast Asia, from Africa, from Latin America. And those are the places that are adding. So China is much more in those places than we are. And that means that the future of market growth, of standards, of innovation, creativity is going to come from that other areas. We're going to be on the sideline. We'll still be rich, but we're not going to be driving the game. And that's what China's pre-deployed better than we have. So thank you all very, very much.